Well, I appreciate y'all jumping on. Both of us on this call completely understand how busy everybody is and your schedules and how crazy you don't even really have a schedule if you're working in the medical facility. And so, again, appreciate you jumping on. I am Dusty. I'm one of the co-founders of Cowork Health. Cowork, our main objective is to make OCMed communication easier for medical facilities, right? We want to modernize that, give them an organized place to communicate with their OCMed clients. So that's our main goal, and that's why we're presenting this webinar alongside Scott. And so I'll introduce Scott, and then we'll get going. On screen with me here is Scott Crawford. He is the VP of Revenue Cycle Management at American Family Care. He joined AFC in March of 2023. He has over 18 years of progressive revenue cycle experience with a foundation in lean process improvement. And Scott believes in the key to success is to always be a student, never stop learning, and embrace an environment of continual process improvement. And I can tell you firsthand, I've worked with him long enough now already that I can see that is true with him and his team. They are definitely always trying to find ways to improve what they're doing. So Scott, let me share my screen here real quick and make sure everybody can see that. Scott, can you confirm you can see that on your side?
I can see it. Yeah.
All right. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Dusty. First of all, I want to thank UCA, obviously, for hosting the webinar. I always find value in listening to what other organizations out there are struggling with and how you're innovating around those problems. And what I hope today, along with Dusty, is to share with you a pilot of our experience with Cowork and the results to date, and hopefully you take away one or two things to think about as you move forward. So Dusty mentioned I'm with American Family Care. We've been an urgent care / accessible primary care player in the market since 1982. We were founded by Dr. Bruce Irwin in 1982 in Birmingham, Alabama. And so we are proud to say that we're celebrating our 42nd, almost 43rd year in existence. We've been doing things in this space, innovating and driving improvements for our communities for a long time. So I know many of you are in the urgent care / occupational health world. And so we're just glad, again, to share with you our experience over the last several months in piloting Cowork at American Family Care's corporate clinics. We have over 360 clinics nationwide across 29 or 30 states. 83 of those clinics are corporately managed and run. And so I oversee the revenue cycle management team that works with those 83 clinics across 6 states. 4 of those in the Southeast, in Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, and Florida. And we also have some corporate locations in Massachusetts and Connecticut. We have a pretty sizable footprint in the occupational health space, both in the Southeast and in our New England region. And when I arrived to American Family Care in March of last year, I quickly realized that we had some challenges in this space as far as revenue cycle management goes. The very first thing that I noticed was that we were really challenged internally to provide good customer service. Our communication with employers and TPAs really wasn't standardized. And we were hearing feedback from employers, but we just weren't able to address challenges quickly enough. We didn't really have all the right either people, processes, or tech in place to really move the needle a little bit further as far as Occ Health goes on the RCM side of things. So I started looking at some potential solutions, and that's when we came across Dusty and the team at Cowork. I think most of you probably do this already, but when you're challenged with particular problems in the RCM setting, the first three things that we always look at, right, are we staffed appropriately? Do we have the right people? The second thing we look at is what is our process and our training that we've provided? Are there opportunities to improve that standardized operating procedure? And then the third thing we look at, obviously, is technology. And so, as I was doing an analysis of those three areas, I always call it our three-legged stool, right? One of the legs might be wobbly, or they may all be wobbly. And so, we have to kind of go in and address and tighten the screws a little bit in order to have a more stable three-legged stool. One of the things I noticed is that we were at American Family Care Corporate perhaps a bit overstaffed on the EPS or occupational health team as far as productivity standards. And so, as far as we thought we should be touching more claims than we were. And we thought, well, we certainly can do a better job of that. We looked at our processes, and one of the main problems, obviously, that I mentioned off the jump was, we needed to be a better steward of our relationships with our employers and our TPAs. Obviously, if we want to drive cash, we need to improve the way we communicate. And so there were a lot of process issues around how we communicate, um, and really set the tone for those relationships. And then thirdly, our technology. We actually have a really good practice management solution, very innovative and sort of forward thinking when it comes to EPS solutions. But we just weren't moving the needle. And so when we embrace this environment of continual process improvement, we look for ways to try to get to the next level. Is there some technology that's doing things a little bit differently than the solution that we have today that might get us some incremental improvement or perhaps substantial improvement? And so the one thing that we did was we looked at our AR, we looked at our cash receivables, we looked at um, the way that we communicate with employers, and we looked at our productivity. And we said, you know what? We need to have a more measurable process in place in order to drive that continual process improvement. We say at American Family Care, whenever if you've ever called our clinic or called customer service, we always like to say we provide the right care right now. And in the clinic setting, uh, that obviously has a very specific definition. But when you take a step back and maybe broaden that definition to the RCM world, we provide the right care right now. That means we want to have efficient care and customer service, no matter what the setting or visit type is. So, in terms of occupational health services, the right care right now from an RCM perspective is providing a good tool for us to use to improve our efficiency in communicating with employers and TPAs, providing our employers and TPAs the ability to become more efficient themselves with this process. And so we set the goal to say, let's come up with a new solution that changes the paradigm of what we're doing in occupational health services. We want to have documented interactions with good accountability of our next steps. We want to be able to provide invoices faster, and we want to be able to make our employers more efficient in how they make payments and interact with AFC. So those were the goals.
Yeah, I'll just chime in there quickly. Working alongside Scott and his team, uh, it was really refreshing to see them keep coming back to the goal of improvement rather than focusing on, all right, what's not working? What's a roadblock? Um, what are all the things that are not going to make this work? Right. And so that's going to guide us kind of to our next section here. Whenever you're making big changes, people, process, technology, or anything else, there's always going to be objections internally that you need to overcome or not. Maybe their objections are big enough and they're true enough where you can't get past them. But Scott, maybe talk through those objections you experienced internally and how you got past those.
Absolutely. Well, a couple of things. We we are a large organization. I know probably not everybody on this call is operating at the scale that we operate. And so when we make a change, we sort of have to take it one bite at a time, right? Because the scale of our operation is so large that if we make a large change quickly and things go awry, it can be extremely disruptive to cash flow. And so some of those internal objections, and not really just they're not really objections necessarily, Dusty, but more or less, how do we approach this thoughtfully, right? How do we make sure that the ideas, the innovation, what we're trying to develop can be tested and done in a measurable way, but a thoughtful way that doesn't interfere with the normal sort of cash flow of the organization. Um, we also struggled with this is a totally different way. If we partner with Cowork, right? This is a totally different way of interacting with our TPAs, with our employers that we have pretty strong relationships with in the community. But we're going to be asking quite a few employers out there, hey, we're going to need you to change the way you process invoices and interact with us. And so, how would they interact? How would they react to the request? Would this application make their lives easier, or would it make it more difficult? So, having to kind of think through that objectively before taking the leap, so to speak. Um, and then, obviously, an important one to think about is we organizationally are fully integrated in our EMR and our PM solution. Um, w- when you add an additional application or a system on top of that, there's always the thought of, well, are we going to have to now work out of two systems? And how is that going to potentially lead to some gaps in process or perhaps errors in the way that we operate? And so thinking through all of these scales or all of these problems, the scale issue, whether or not companies out there would adopt with us or be just totally opposed to how we're interacting in the new environment. And then obviously, does it make sense to have multiple systems? So, you know, our approach to that had to be measured. We had to think about how that would impact uh, uh, our our process. And when we go back to sort of that initial goal that we talked about, how do we provide the right care right now? How do we improve those customer relations? How do we improve cash flow? How do we minimize errors and how do we drive better interaction, right? With the companies that we're working with in the occ health space. And when we sat down and we did a comparison against current state versus potential future state, piloting with Cowork made a lot of sense. So uh, let me just when we first partnered with with Cowork, we decided that we would go live in our New England market, which is about a third the size of what we are in the Southeast. So it's a measured approach. If something were to break, we would catch it pretty quickly and it would not be necessarily as disruptive. Um, and so that's sort of led us to where we are current state, which is ultimately we've built out Cowork in both the New England region and in the South region for AFC corporate clinics, and we continue to look at the results and impact of the system in our operations.
I think that's what I heard too, even before we partnered and started trying this, was really, I kept hearing from your team, just reiterating, like, we need to know if this is going to work before we go big. Right. And so I think that, but that mindset of going, all right, it's the goal of moving things forward with relationship, with communication, with collections. If we hit those goals, all these objections, all these problems, aren't really problems anymore because we're hitting our goal, right? There's things that we just need to rethink about and change how we go about it. So, I mean, again, I know I wasn't on your team. I'm not on your team, but I've experienced how you guys work through that, and it's really refreshing to see how focused you were on that improvement versus the problems of getting to that improvement. Um, One quick comment too. We will take some Q&A if we have any at the end. And so just a reminder, there should be a Q&A button on the Zoom interface, and feel free to put your question in there whenever they come up to you. Okay. So you overcame those objections. You decided, okay, we're going to try this. Let's talk through, how do you think about implementing that?
Yeah. So, you never know how it goes with implementations, right? If you've been through one implementation of a new healthcare application, you've been through one implementation. Um, I I am a firm believer that when you're going through an application implementation, you either need to invest in training up front, or you're going to end up paying for that training later on. Like, either way, right? You need to make sure that you're aligned and understand the investment. Um, for us, the implementation of Cowork in New England, and then ultimately as we expanded into the South a couple of months ago, uh, was pretty straightforward. We needed to organize some of our data. So our employer dictionaries out of the practice management solution, our protocols and charges, but all of that's readily available, and allowed us the opportunity to sort of scroll through the data and make sure that it was clean, and kind of doing just some of our blocking and tackling, so to speak, to make sure that when we did load into um, Cowork, that we had a smooth transition. One of the most important things that I've learned about ourselves as a company and as an RCM team during the implementation was that we have some really good forward thinking folks on our team that, maybe in the past haven't had the experience to develop some of these skills, or potentially weren't given the right tools or right opportunities to kind of shine. But either way, during the implementation, um, we we had to learn a few things about, um, interfacing between our practice management solution and Cowork. So we had to be comfortable with Excel and a few other processes. But we had some people that really stepped up to the plate, and I think what made that easy for them, and I think this is important in any process improvement or implementation, not just specific to this, Dusty, but when we are going through a process improvement, it's always important to document uh, the steps that you're taking, and to develop what we call standard operating procedures, or SOPs. And once we get those SOPs in place, it makes everybody's life a lot easier as far as following the steps to hit a goal, or hit a go live date, or make a process improvement. And so we did a lot of documentation and standard operating procedure development during the implementation phase. And by the time we got to our go live date, we had a very smooth go live, I would say. There's a little bit of things that need to be fixed, refined, after you get the system up and running. But I would say from the time that we were able to load all of our data into Cowork, it wasn't but maybe a week to 2 weeks later that we started loading invoices and reviewing invoices in the system.
Yeah, from our side, we obviously have a different experience with implementation, but when you're talking about the scale that AFC is, yeah, you always wonder how it's going to go. But yeah, it went really smooth. But hats off to Scott and the team, and taking a lot of ownership in that. And then since that implementation, I see the word refinement on the screen there. We continue to do that with them, with other clients, but there's little things that you make over time, process improvements. We have a really open dialogue with their team. And so things that would make their life a little bit easier, or make their clients' life a little bit easier, and things that we can update and change. Um, we've learned so much from each other, just having that open dialogue. And so that's been really good. And just seeing that refinement from day one to where we're at.
Yeah, I think when we get into some of the platform here in the next slide or two, we'll call out some of the things that have been refined over the last several months as far as the application goes. Um, but that has been one of the more refreshing aspects of this pilot program so far is really thinking through uh, sort of our process internally with our partner at Cowork, with Dusty and the team to make sure that we're utilizing the application to the best of everyone's experience, right? Um, and we'll talk a little bit about this later on as well. But also, how is how are these continued refinements impacting the employer or the TPA, right? And ultimately setting us up for success to achieve those goals, to improve and ultimately to improve um, our service level to those of our customers, so that we can provide that right care right.
So Scott alluded to it. So we're going to actually show you a little bit about what the Cowork platform looks like and how AFC utilizes that in their day to day. The screens you'll see are a test environment, so it's not exactly theirs. Obviously, we want to share their data, but we'll step through some of those screens right now. So Scott, this is the all invoices screen, which we call it. So take it away.
Yeah, again, Dusty, this is what we call our home screen, our home base. Um, this is pretty darn informative from a management standpoint and from an RCM standpoint. This screen is the all invoices screen and has a lot of flexibility in what you can do and how you can view the data. But ultimately, what you're looking at is every invoice that this is, of course, a test environment. So this will be every invoice that this particular Southside Speedy Care has submitted uh, for its history in Cowork. And you can search for invoices at the top, which for us, that makes it really easy. If we get a message through the platform, or if we get a call from a company, we can immediately find the invoice in question just by a quick search. But there's also a lot of filtering features and options that we take advantage of, that I specifically take advantage of. Um, we can look at the companies, we can get the invoice number, we can see what counts, or in Cowork, as it's called, reference numbers are on that invoice. We can see how much balance is on the invoice, whether it's in a paid or a closed status, or maybe it's pending. Um, we'll talk a little bit more about tasks in a second, but finally, you can see the send date. And one of the most important features for us at American Family Care is this viewed column. It looks like a little eyeball. And one of our problems that we consistently saw in our previous process was that we would maybe do some AR follow up, call a TPA that may have not made a payment on their invoice. And a lot of times the feedback or response that we received from them was, "Hey, we haven't seen the invoice yet." Um, and that may or may not be true. Maybe the person we were talking to had not seen the invoice, but maybe the company had. But we just had no visibility or accountability. There was no accountability to, "Hey, we know that you viewed this invoice on this date." In Cowork, you absolutely can see when the companies have viewed the invoice. So as you hover over that blue eyeball icon, that indicates that somebody at the company has viewed the invoice. And I know you can't look at it on this screenshot, but what will pop up when you hover over it is exactly who at Darren's Towel Company or ABC Toys or Wasabi viewed the invoice, at what time they viewed the invoice and date. That way, if you're having to do some AR management, AR follow up, that question is now moot. Like, you don't have to even address that. You can bring that to the table and say, "We see that you've seen the invoice. What questions do you have?" And it just changes the dynamic of that whole interaction and adds value to those interactions. So we love that viewed, and you can filter this entire screen by companies that have viewed their invoice or companies that have not viewed their invoice. And it allows you to have those types of conversations and those strategic follow up opportunities. What you can do that I really like doing is sorting this like an Excel spreadsheet by highest amount due, um, and then companies that have viewed the invoice. So now we can make personal, strategic phone calls to those companies to say, "Hey, how can we help you get this across the goal line? What questions do you have? Are you waiting on results? Do you have feedback on the invoice that needs to be addressed?" um, Instead of just waiting passively for those companies to come to us. So there are a number of things that we really love about this invoice screen and the abilities that it provides us. Dusty, I don't know from your perspective if you have anything that you like to highlight on the screen.
No, I mean, that was great. I mean, the suggestion, I'm gonna pass it along to other clients maybe if they're not doing that. The whole, "Hey, see who's viewed it and sort by, balance due." I love that suggestion. Never heard of that before, but that's great thought there. It's like, okay, they've obviously engaged with it. Let's go be a friendly reminder. Maybe the only other thing to point out here really quick are, we make all this data accessible to you, obviously, on the platform. It's also exportable to Excel, and so if you wanna export everything here, it actually gives you more data that you don't even see on screen, like notes and things like that. You can do that and manipulate that data even further. Same thing with the agent report that just dropped right to Excel for you.
One other thing that I would bring attention to, and I we were talking about refinements on the last screen, and one of the features on this screen, it really is its own sort of module within Cowork, are the tasks. Um, th- at our scale, one of the first things that we realized was not necessarily working as well as it needed to when we went live in our pilot in New England was that we had the ability to directly message back and forth with companies, and believe me, we were receiving a lot of messages through the platform. But those messages were sort of going to everybody, and there was not a way to within the platform assign accountability, assign who owns that particular task. And so bringing that to Dusty and Cowork's attention, they were able to sort of develop this internal task management solution. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about some of the data behind that in a little bit. But what this allows us to do now is when we have a critical issue that comes up regarding an invoice or a result, and it needs to be addressed immediately, or maybe over the next 24 hours, or maybe it's not as high of a priority. We're able to assign a task to a particular user, and all of those interactions and communication now are happening within Cowork as opposed to outside of the system, and that has made us more efficient internally from a process standpoint.
Yeah, we'll definitely show you all the task screen. But just to hit that home here, so the task column here, some are blue, some are not. If they're blue, that means there's an incomplete task on that. And so while you can see all your tasks on the task screen, which I'll show you in a second here, there's also a task filter. So if I just wanted to be on invoices and show me, hey, show me invoices that have incomplete tasks on it, that's also a way you can filter data. So let's keep going here. So, the question is, how do you get your invoices in Cowork?
Yeah.
So we'll talk about the kind of the batch review, what we call the batch review process here.
Great. So we have a great report, a standard report out of our practice management solution that we can easily run and load into the Cowork system through an Excel file. The process takes mm, less than 5 minutes from one system to the next. And what we particularly love about how this process works is that we're able to take for a period of time every invoice that we'd like to run and move it into a batch in Cowork. And then the system automatically creates these individual invoice lines by company. And what our team does is we assign out a batch or a company to our occupational health analysts on the RCM team, and they will then go to this screen, which is called batches. These are sort of the rough drafts of the invoice, and they're not visible to the employer just yet. They're only visible internally. And we have a process to where our team goes into each invoice to ensure that one, the protocols are accurate, pricing looks good. Uh, and we have the opportunity, as you see on the right side of the screen, to either give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down, approve it or discard it. And once we approve it, it puts it in a pending status for us to approve the entire batch. And once we do that, invoices are delivered seamlessly, all at the same time for all of the approved batches.
Right. And, and that's how they end up on that previous screen where we're at, where, you can see all those invoices. Obviously, they're going to show up in an unpaid status to start. And since this is a portal as well, so your clients are logging in. I don't think we showed, the client view of this anywhere. Now I think of it, but they can also see the status of the invoices. So all these statuses you see here, obviously they're not getting all the detail that you get. But when they log into Cowork, they can see every invoice you've ever sent them and whether they've been paid, voided, unpaid, closed out, or anything else. So that's another way they can kind of self-serve and manage their invoices there.
So I just want to add my perspective on that point. When we go back to AFC's goal, Dusty, one of the things that we wanted to make sure of is that we're making our employers, our TPAs, more efficient in how they operate and how they handle this process. And um, we are providing those employers a wonderful gift to be sort of streamlined and organized as far as their invoices from American Family Care. When all they have to do now is log into that portal and they can see all of their open balances for any invoice that they've received from us immediately. The feedback that we're hearing from TPAs, from employers, um, is that uh, this is a much more seamless way of interacting with us so far. So I just wanted to add my 10 cents to that one.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. And it's a good segue into, so this is the one kind of side we're showing you from the client perspective. So obviously they're going to be able to see and download those invoices. But the other thing that we all hope they do, right, is pay for that invoice. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, I obviously cash is king. And when it comes to occupational health services, if we've provided the service, we've provided the result, and we've generated an invoice in a timely manner, there really should not be a roadblock for the employer to make a payment. In fact, I think in most of my interactions over the last year with companies and TPAs, they want to make payment. They do. They don't want this hanging over their heads for months at a time, or if they're running into deadlines with their fiscal year end, they want to be able to be as efficient as possible. And what we really have come to appreciate utilizing the Cowork application is that our companies now have the ability to make an electronic ACH payment or a credit card payment through the Cowork platform. Um, and one of the things that we noticed is that when for the first 2 to 3 days, when we roll out an invoice package, uh, our payments go up significantly. And that's because we're seeing a lot of interaction from companies that are going in and they're paying their $100 invoice with a credit card or through an ACH payment, like within 24 to 48 hours of receiving the invoice notification. And, some of our larger TPAs, they may take a little bit more time, but, we can handle those relationships and we have sort of a different relationship with those larger clients. Uh, I love that we're giving the smaller companies, the smaller employers that maybe we in the past haven't been able to spend as much time with from an RCM standpoint, a really efficient way one, viewing their invoices, and two, making a payment so that they can carry on about their business of providing their services to their community. This has been a big win as far as our Cowork implementation, and we love the ability to receive payments from our employers and TPAs via electronic payments.
So the other thing I'll touch on really quick while we're on the screen, now that I see it, if you can see in the background here, if we were just looking at the invoice, there's this new message button. Every item within Cowork has that button on it. And so that if one of your clients has a question about an invoice, about a result or anything else, they can click that. That item is automatically attached to that question for your team. And now you can start that real-time messaging thread without having to figure it out or attach it to an email where you probably shouldn't be if it's not encrypted, all that good stuff. So all that interaction can happen within Cowork as well. Uh, so, not everybody pays right away, right? And so the other key thing that we worked with groups really early on, we're developing Cowork is one big time suck is that follow up of getting payment, is that collections. And we hear two stories, right? The two stories we always heard are either we spend no time on that, and so there's so much money sitting out there that we're never going to get, or we spend way too much time doing one to one phone calls or one to one emails trying to collect dollars that are still sitting out there. But Scott, I'll let you tell from your experience a little bit.
Yeah, so I think, fell into the former category where we we spent a lot of our time on generating invoices, and making sure protocols were accurate and dealing with customer service concerns and questions that we weren't able to sort of reallocate our team to do true AR follow up, AR management in the EPS space. And if we did, obviously we were more focused on sort of those high value bills outstanding versus, like I mentioned previously, sort of all the little ones that sort of add up to a lot, right? And so when we look at a process, or when you sort of approach this from a lean process improvement standpoint, any opportunity that you can implement some automation into the process, that's really the ideal state. And so what Cowork does to help with AR management and follow up is it allows for automatic invoice reminders, and we have total discretion as to how often those reminders are sent. Um, and I think organizationally, you know, there may be different um, uh, philosophies on how that works. But you know, we I mentioned one of our focus opportunities was our people, right? And maybe we were staffed a little heavily a year ago, given our potential productivity standard, and um, we wanted to make sure that in the co-work environment we could do more AR management, more follow up. Uh, but what co-work does to help enhance that are these automatic reminders. And one of the things that we learned early on, mm, even if employers have the ability to make a payment via electronic, some still don't, and probably may never. A lot of employers and TPAs still like to write checks, and that's okay too. We'll take cash either any way we can get it. But what we found in our implementation, maybe the first 30 to 45 days, was that we had been a little too aggressive in how we had set up these automatic invoice reminders. So day one, we'd send the invoice, and then we had it set up to where every 15 days, a reminder would go out. But what we found relatively quickly was that our employers were engaging in the product. They weren't necessarily messaging us, but then they would send a check, and that check would be stuck in the snail mail process, right? And we just had not received it yet at corporate office to get it posted. And so what we wanted to do was avoid hounding somebody that's already engaged in cut a check. And so it's great. We have the ability to immediately go in once we realized it was a problem and sort of shift how and when those automatic invoice reminders were going out. And this is a great setting. It helps with automation on AR management, and really, really helps set us up for success with our relationships with employers.
So I kind of jumped the gun before, but the next way is, how do people interact with clinics? And that's, typically through the messaging platform. And so I'll let Scott talk through kind of how they use it in their environment.
Yeah. So, in our previous uh, uh, process prior to Cowork, interaction was sporadic with employers. It was phone calls. Sometimes those phone calls would go to the clinic. Sometimes those phone calls would go to customer service. Sometimes those phone calls would go directly to our EPS team, which would be the ideal way. We were also receiving emails, but it was not just individual emails. It was sort of a shared credentialing at AFC email address, right? And we had a little bit of the same problem that I mentioned earlier, as far as not really understanding who owns that email. And so it was uh, disjointed, might be the right word. But in the platform, with the task management solution, we now see more and more companies every month engaging with us through the messaging platform. And the cool thing about it is when you look at this screen, and I think this is a great demonstration, even what our live environment looks like. The companies have the ability to, without even really thinking about it, create a message off an invoice. And so when they message us, not only do we see the message, but the invoice in the platform is attached to that message, allowing our team, whoever may be assigned to work the message, to immediately go to what needs to be reviewed. But not only does it attach the invoice, we also have the ability to attach a task, um, and it just makes the internal process so much smoother than what we were used to.
Great. Just a couple more slides, then we'll get to some Q&A. So just a reminder, if you do have questions, start putting those in the Q&A work here. Let's see. Okay. So yeah, last screen we'll show you within Cowork is kind of that task management. If you want to see an overview of all your tasks. So anything to add here, Scott, or how you work through that?
You know, I think the high point here, Dusty, is as managers, we want to know where we stand with any particular request from a company or a TPA. And what this allows us to do as managers is immediately go into the task solution, see what issues are being addressed by the team, where they are, if they've been started, maybe they're in progress, maybe they're on hold, and internally be able to communicate on where we are to get these things and close the loop. The last thing we want to do with a company or a TPA is have them reach out with a well thought through problem for them, or an issue that needs to be addressed and have that fall through the gap. Again, our goal is to provide the right care right now. And we want to make sure that any issue that's coming our direction and we're accountable for, we're addressing in a timely manner. And so what task management has allowed us to do is have a little bit more visibility into what the team's working on.
Great. And I just realized all my tasks in my demo environment are overdue, and it's kind of stressing me out a little bit. I'm going to update that data. Um, all right. So the last thing we'll talk through is just, AFC is pretty early in this process still, but just kind of a few data points or anecdotes on what they've kind of experienced so far.
Yeah. So again, we wanted, from a goal standpoint, to make sure that we're having better interactions with our employers. And so far, since January, February timeframe, we've had 326 messages back and forth with companies. Now, those are 326 individual messages. Within those messages, there are conversations going on. And so, really, the point here is that we are starting to centralize the way we communicate with our companies. And every month, we're seeing more and more interaction through the platform from the messaging standpoint. So really love to see this number continue to grow and help us standardize how we interact. The second point and goal that we talked about earlier on, Dusty, was that we wanted to be more efficient internally, right? we wanted to make sure that we were closing the loop, like we just talked about on the task screen. So since roughly 45 days ago, when task management rolled out, we've seen about 43 tasks. So a little over a couple of maybe a task a day. And I think what this again is allowing us to do is have more visibility and accountability to what our team is working on, and making sure that nothing falls through the gap for our company, helping drive that here right now goal. Um, the third thing that we wanted to make sure of is, of course, our employers and our TPAs, or our employers specifically, are very important to us. But that TPA relationship, those TPAs that sort of have a high value as far as the number of accounts that they process for us, we want to make sure that we have a good relationship with them and provide, good uh, mediums for them to communicate with us. And so uh, we have seen our interaction with, and I'll just, with First Advantage is one of our larger TPAs, and I'm sure that they're one of your larger TPAs as well. Um, our relationship with this TPA has improved because of the interaction through Cowork, and we're having more thoughtful discussions with them. Um, there are some aspects that we didn't talk about as far as the platform goes, that we're still like in a trial stage as far as how results are delivered. And I know Dusty can speak more about that if you're interested in talking with him about how that works. Um, but we're starting to trial that to some degree with First Advantage and likely other TPAs in the coming weeks. And it's set us up to have a more positive relationship with some of these high value partnerships at First Advantage, Vault, the big TPAs out there. And that's only a good thing, because ultimately what we're trying to do is accelerate cash. And believe it or not, um, we've seen a so far very nice improvement in our cash flow. So when we look at where we were last year on sort of a month to month basis with occupational health services, we have been able over the last quarter and a half drive some months 2x to 3x the amount of cash that we were seeing on average over the previous 12 months. A lot of that is older AR, and a lot of that is the new AR that is being paid almost instantaneously within 24 to 48 hours, because the process is working a little bit smoother for our employers today. So far, the results are very, very promising at AFC corporate locations. And as we continue out this pilot and expand to what results and potentially authorizations look like through the Cowork environment, we look forward to sort of building out the case study and ultimately maybe moving to the next level with our relationship.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. We'll jump to some Q&A. I see one question here, so we'll take that one. But again, if you have any questions about Ahmed processes, about Cowork, about anything else you think within this wheelhouse at all, please ask him and we'll do our best to answer them. So the first question I see on screen here is any API sharing? If so, which platform? So if you're non-technical, API just means basically integration. Can we integrate with other platforms? So yeah, we absolutely can. We have our own API and as well as tapped into others. Um, the EMR world has to make sense for both parties involved. We are definitely open to that. EMRs are very, very busy vendors and have many people coming to them asking them to integrate. And so just that priority for them can be difficult, but we definitely do have that. And MedFiller is one interface we already have. So MedFiller is a platform you might want to look at if you have paper OcMed forms today and you want to digitize those things. MedFiller is a great solution for that. We do integrate with them already. And so those forms can appear in Cowork to be shared automatically as well. So that is one example of that. I see another question come up here. This one hopefully is for you, Scott, it looks like. So The question is, what strategies did AFC use to get employers to adopt the platform, or what has Cowork seen work with other clients? I'll let you go first, and I can chime in if I don't hear anything.
Yeah, great. So, yeah, the number one strategy for us was we wanted to provide a long enough runway for our employers to understand that we were making this change. So very early on in the implementation process, once we once we were able to aggregate the employer data and load their information into the Cowork platform, we were able to send out some marketing material about what we were doing. Um, and we were able to email directly and get in touch with several important high value that be defined as sort of a high volume of accounts or maybe high AR, but to just allow them to understand that we were making this transition. So we had several sort of touch points with employers throughout the implementation, sort of telling them to get ready, telling them to know that the change was coming. Because ultimately, when you load those email addresses into Cowork, what happens at that point is that an invitation is sent out for the employer to join the platform if they're not already in the system. And so we wanted to make sure that we were doing everything we could to provide visibility. Yes, this is American Family Care. Yes, we are going live with a new platform, and yes, you should be expecting some type of interaction from the platform asking you to create a login. And so it's all about communication, and that's the important thing. So, Dusty.
Yeah. So from our perspective, we do provide all groups that sign on with Cowork a communication guide. They don't have to follow it, but it gives you kind of a schedule of here's some recommendations of when and how to communicate. Here's some messaging you can use, even edit however you want. So we provide some tools to clients when they're coming on board. The other thing we knew when building Cowork from the start, we wanted to make it as easy for the companies to log in as possible. So we've done some things like, self-serve password resets. We have a magic link login capabilities, which are pretty cool, where basically they don't even need to remember their password and they can log in through other secure means to the platform. And so we've tried to make steps in the platform to make it as intuitive as possible to both get into the platform, but then also use it as well. And the other thing is, the story I hear all the time is you got to remember you're already communicating with your clients, right? They're already getting mail from you, phone calls, faxes, things like that. And we hear over and over again from our clients that their clients much prefer the method of communicating on Cowork. And so it's a normal hesitation and concern of like, oh, are these people going to adopt it? We've heard over and over again that most companies actually prefer the communication method on Cowork versus what they're getting today.
Yeah, and I can speak quickly to that. The vast majority of our employers have been open to this. We have heard back from some companies. It's not all sunshine. Some companies have strict IP issues that may prohibit them from creating another password and having access to a platform. Um, that has absolutely been the exception and not the general response that we received. But in those instances, or that one instance, what we've done to address that is interact directly with the company, via phone call, via email, uh, but we're still benefiting from sort of the ease of creating a nice invoice through the Cowork platform. And if they need us to email them a PDF version of that invoice, it's really as simple as exporting the invoice and putting it in an email. I don't love non-standardized practices, but inevitably, with as many employers as we work with, you're gonna have onesie twosie things. And you know, I want to just express like Cowork is not a barrier to that. It still allows you to do some things to meet the need of the employer, and make sure that they are receiving what they need on a timely basis.
So one more question pop up here. Does the API between Cowork and his clients allow for payment data to be passed for automated posting to the AR and the PM? It's a great question. We didn't show the payment screen in Cowork, so we record all the transactions that are happening and give you a really nice like line item view of what's being paid or what's been paid in Cowork, we can produce an Excel file for that. The problem with that is document billing, isn't a standard format like insurance billing is. So there's not, an EOB or um, what's the form you would know, Scott? Basically, where you can upload payments on the insurance side. So that's something that does not exist today. And I mean, Scott, if you want to talk through a little bit what that posting, that reconciliation process looks like for your team, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah, no, of course. Actually, when we're evaluating Cowork and potential impact to the organization, I didn't mention this earlier. I should have. One of the main internal questions that we kind of worked through was the impact of the cash posting process. Because the reality is, AR is still living in our practice management solution. Of course, it's reflected in Cowork, but now we're receiving payments through Cowork. We're also receiving payments through the mail, and it's going to change how we sort of get things posted in the host system, right? And so there was a lot of maybe concern. Yeah, concern's probably the right word. There was concern as to whether or not this new process would be as efficient as what we were doing from a cash posting standpoint prior to the go live. What we have found is that the reconciliation process is actually quite seamless. Our team is able to export the co-work payments into a nice, friendly Excel spreadsheet, and they do that routinely. And what they're able to do is then post all of those payments off that really easy, standard in one place spreadsheet in our host system. And the feedback since go live from the cash posting team is they actually love the new process. It's making things a lot easier for them. That's, I mean, I think that is a legitimate concern that people need to be thinking through. Um, is this going to be more efficient in some ways, but to the detriment of the cash posting process on the back end? But we just haven't experienced that. In fact, our cash posting team has been quite happy with this new process.
Yeah, I think that's a very common hesitation we hear, and it's a little counterintuitive of why it might actually be easier for that posting team, even though it feels like two systems. But I think what you explained there kind of makes sense. So we're just about at time anyway. If I see a quick question pop up as I close down here, we might take it. But otherwise, I really appreciate y'all joining us. Of course, one did pop up. I'll just read it. We'll give it a chance. Is there any shared percent of revenue between a health facility and Cowork? So we're not a service. If I understand the question correctly, we're not taking a percent of collection or anything like that. We are a SaaS platform where you pay a monthly fee to get access to the software. Hopefully that was the question and that makes sense. But I appreciate that last minute question there. That one always sneaks in, it seems like. Scott, I can't thank you enough for joining us and walking through how you and the AFC team utilizes Cowork so far. Like you mentioned, we're in the early phase. We have a long way to go still, and we're excited to do that with you. But Scott, thanks so much. I'll let you say goodbye and we'll get on our way.
Of course, thank you, Dusty, and again, thank you to UCA for being on the event this morning, and of course, thank you to you, Dusty, for helping facilitate the discussion.
Awesome. Right on time. Thanks, everybody. We'll hopefully see you in the next one.